Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Control, Privilege, Identity, and Access Management in the Hybrid Cloud. Giving our presentation today is Patrick McBride, VP of Marketing here at Expedium, followed by a demo given by Sean Hank, Manager of Systems Engineers at Expedium as well. We will be holding some time towards the end to answer any of your questions, so as we go along, please feel free to type your questions into the question box, and then we'll make sure that we get to them. We'll also be recording this webinar, so everyone will be receiving a copy of this recording probably within the next day or so. I hope you all enjoy our presentation today, and with that, I'll hand it over to Patrick. So whenever you're ready, Patrick, you're all set to begin.
Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everybody. It's a downright balmy early January day here in the Washington, D.C. area, about 54 degrees outside and sunny, so we're liking our little midwinter break here. It's about 12 Celsius. We've got a group, both North American group and some international guests on today, so we really appreciate you being here and spending a little bit of time with us. So since you all can see the slides, you probably noticed right off that we've got a deck here that has a bunch of Amazon Web Services branding on it, and the logic, basically we're redoing a presentation that we gave at Amazon Web Services' first annual users conference that they did towards the end of November in Las Vegas. We followed that up and stayed the next week in Las Vegas for Gartner's Identity and Access Management. So between those two, I think a bunch of us got about 12 days in Las Vegas, which for some of us was about 9 days too many. But certainly it was a lot of fun. The AWS event was excellent. Tons and tons of people there. We learned a lot from customers of AWS have visited with us at our booth, and we're just delighted that they put on such a good show, very content-rich show. So if you guys are doing anything or looking at AWS, I definitely encourage that for next year. But what we're going to do here today, Sean and I, is talk a little bit about privilege, identity, and access management. And I'm going to spend the first chunk of it taking you through some definitional slides, kind of setting up, what some of the issues and concerns that the customers and the prospective customers that we work with are having, some of the things that they're doing to attack that problem, and then Sean's going to give you a tour, kind of a quick tour of our X Suite platform. And we would encourage you to certainly ask questions there, and of course we would be available afterwards if anybody wants to dive in. We know, for a fact that lots of different customers are at a different place in terms of how they're setting up their networks, how they're using virtualization and cloud platforms along with traditional computing methods. So we tend to get, lots of opportunity to dig in and answer those questions much more specifically if we set up a one-on-one. So I'd be happy to do that as well. So hopefully we'll whet your appetite a little bit, and we'd be happy to go down a little bit further. So in kicking this off, the first place to start with all of these presentations, or we found that the best place to start is to with a top-level definition of who are privileged users, since we're going to be mentioning them throughout the presentation. And when you say privileged users, it conjures up a lot of different types of people depending on who you're talking to. So specifically, we're talking about the systems, the network, the database, or even application administrators in your environment. So folks working traditionally for your IT organization or potentially partners, and that tend to have, shall we say, the keys to the kingdom very often, have high level of rights, elevated privileges to do things on servers or with services, with applications, etc. And there's really two ways, a couple of different lenses that you can look through there. Certainly some of those folks work in your offices, on your premise, are directly connected to your network. But with employees working remotely, or partners that may not be an on-site contractor, but maybe doing something remotely, there are privileged users that are outside of the boundaries of your on-premise environment, and certainly very often outside some of the the defense in depth. And there's really two sets of multiple sets of things that they're accessing. Certainly some of those servers and devices, network devices, and applications may reside in our large enterprise customers traditionally reside on-premise. Certainly we see a lot of virtualization of those devices and servers going on. But we also see a rapid rise in the use of services like Amazon Web Services and other cloud providers, where some of those devices or many of those devices may be on an environment and be running in a data center or a shared environment that's obviously outside of the four walls of your network and frankly beyond many of your defense and depth controls that you may have in place. And so we've got our unauthorized user down at the bottom, and we'll talk with a lot more detail about who those people may be and what sort of risks that they pose. The biggest and most direct risk is if somebody gains access, privileged access to those devices, then there's a lot that they can do. Also, kind of up front, we wanted to introduce another concept here before we go on, because there's a standard set of privileged users, folks like your systems network DB admins that have, very often are overprivileged, may have more rights than they need to do their job. That's a really hard thing to manage, and we'll talk about that. But you've got also another class of user when you talk about virtualization environments or cloud environments. There's this concept of the management consoles that allow you to control your infrastructure running in those environments. So in this scenario where things like the Amazon Web Services console allows you to manage all of your infrastructure running up in AWS, and those accounts are really require another level. Those are really super user, highly privileged accounts, and require some really interesting controls. Now, the good news in Amazon scenario is they've done a lot to wire in some protections for that. We've done a lot to integrate with those, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. But this new class of super user, super privileged user crops up as well, and something that a lot of organizations are starting to pay a lot more attention to as they migrate to virtual and cloud. So if we take a look at what some organizations, kind of a minimum set of things that organizations are doing, what's required, what kind of attention are these users getting? Certainly there's very often a set of paper policies that go into some details about what they can or can't do. Certainly some special training in how they're supposed to conduct themselves. Some organizations do background investigations. If you think about this context, not only your employees, but you might have highly privileged users, working for a contractor or an outsourcer. There's some organizations are thinking about contractual commitments to do those kinds of investigations, etc. Very often these accounts are important enough that instead of just a user ID password two-factor authentication, organizations are turning to variations of different multi-factor, three-factor authentication, things like smart cards or soft tokens, etc. And of course, these people use a specialized tool set. They use things like SSH or terminal emulators, and command and console access that we talked about on the last slide. So they have access to some unique and specialized tools that the general end user population doesn't have access to. So between the credentials that they have and the access rights they have and the tools that they use, they can often they do all the really good work that they need to keep your environment up and running, but that does come with some risks that need to get managed. So let's take a look at those risks, and there's really kind of two buckets of risk. And the first one that has gotten a whole lot of attention lately is a set of compliance issues. I guess in a one way to put it is the auditors really woke up to how critical these accounts are, how critical it is to protect them, and we're seeing a fair amount of activity in that environment. So there's been specific language added to some of the, for example, in the federal area, in the U.S. federal government, the language to FISMA and some of the requirements there to specifically manage those accounts, both on the civilian agencies and the DoD agencies. We're seeing PCI, the payment card data security standards, have added specific language. The NERC standards, the for energy organizations, have added some specific things, and so you're starting to see both the regulators wake up to and address this, but you're also seeing auditors scrutinize this, whether there's a specific regulation that is in place or not. The auditors are definitely looking at shared accounts, making sure that who was root. At 11:30, somebody logged on to a root account to manage a server. Well, who was that individual? And so auditability back to that level ends up being something that auditors are looking for. They're really frowning on the use of shared credentials, particularly if sharing of passwords and IDs, et cetera. I know none of the folks on the phone today do, but some of our other clients have, and some of the prospective clients we're talking to have big long spreadsheets or file shares where all the credentials for all the different systems that they have are available to the both the internal folks or potentially the external folks, and that's certainly not that's certainly a large risk. We've for years in security we've talked and lamented at the sometimes weak or the use of default passwords. A lot of folks are paying more attention to that, but it still creeps through, and if an attacker gains access because of a weak or default password on one device, very often they can figure out how to move laterally through your organization, whether those devices are on your network or up in the cloud. So that's certainly a concern. And then the overall poor privilege management, and we talked a little bit about overprivilege earlier. Just the way IT does work these days. Very often people join a team to launch some new service or system. They may be part of that team, need certain rights. Then they're not on that team, when it goes operational, but they end up still maintaining, access privileges, et cetera. So that, that comes into play. And so auditors are looking at, whether organizations are keeping people overprivileged, as it were. You always gain privileges, but very often forget to take them away as people move on from project to project, or even leave the organization, or are no longer your outsourcer, etc. And in general, this kind of wraps under the heading of violating this idea of least privilege, only having the access rights that you need to, specific rights that you need to carry out your job. So there's other risk issues from a more traditional security perspective, and the adage these days is very often the compliance issues get you the money, but what you're really doing with that money is trying to make sure that you're doing what you need to protect, from a security perspective, protect your environment, make sure that it can't be harmed. And so I'm going to put up, I'm going to do a little contrarian thing here for a second. If you did, many people are, know about the Verizon data breach report. So this is some data from the 2012 report. And if you did a cursory read of the Verizon data breach report from 2012, just at a top level summary thing, you may walk away with an idea that, are these privileged insiders really a threat? Hey, these the auditors, the compliance guys are really digging in on this, but does this report show it? And if you said look on the left column there, only 4% of the breaches trace back to an internal employee. If you read below the line there, they talk a lot about the fact that that's just because the mechanized number of external events, or attacks that are coming in. People are using botnets and things like that to launch lots and lots of attacks, not just the DDoS attacks that we're talking about, but other kind of using other attack vectors. And so it's the sheer number has kind of driven the percentage down, but it's steadily rose, in terms of the internal employees. If you look at the right thing, how do breaches occur and resulted from privilege misuse, this is again by employees. So, you might look at that and say, well, wait a minute. So what's the big deal? Well, the whole idea of the Verizon data breach report is they collect specific breach data from breaches around the world. There's a lot of there's a lot of U.S. Law enforcement that participates, but there's law enforcement agencies and companies that are participating now from around the globe. So this has become a not everywhere is represented, but they've got a lot of data points from breaches. And what they do is they walk through each of the breach to figure out who was behind it, what the motivation of the attacker was, what was the attack mode or the attack vector, some kind of tool, what was the target of the attack, and what was the result. And what they do with that information, or the use for this data breach report, isn't just to say, roll up some information. It's really designed to provide very practical guidance on how to protect yourself from these breaches. So now let's look at two other numbers on here that I don't have circled. 98% stem from external agents, so who's behind breaches, and then looking at how do they occur, 81% was some form of hacking and 69% in incorporated malware. So if you break down these breaches, look at what the attack vector was, and they have a very specific, formulaic approach to looking at how these breaches happen, and then providing recommendations based on there. If you take a look at the recommendations, they belie some of the data that I showed or highlighted on the front. So if we look in these are the top level recommendations in the report. The use of hacking and the use of stolen credentials is a huge issue. And so if you look at some of the mitigation strategies that they propose, protecting administrative activity or privilege activity, adding two-factor, restricting administrative connections, this is all about privilege use and privilege users, and controlling or reducing your attack surface area by reducing who has access to that and what they can do. The other one, backdoors, command controls, you'll see, we've highlighted the restricting user administrative rights. If you look at malware, some 69%, included some malware. Very often, those folks aren't just trying to grab documents; they're trying to look for passwords. And
actually, I think
when was it Willie Sutton was asked years ago, why attack Fort Knox? His answer was because that's where why attack banks, basically, because that's where the money is. It's the same thing. What are malware guys going after if they're putting it out there? They're looking for passwords, especially privileged passwords. So restricting those in
I don't have it in Dropbox
what those
because
passwords
there's a huge
actually allow you to do down to just the bare minimum necessary ends up being important. And then brute force attacks. Again, all these things drop back down to administrative connections, which were all about privilege use, etc. So, just pretty interesting. So you've got really this, the two major concerns are the compliance and passing audit scrutiny, but there are some very, very serious risks here, even if you're taking a look at some of the other attack vectors, not just an internal employee grabbing something that they should. This is what the external guys are using to do what they do in terms of stealing data, shutting down systems, etc. So what kind of controls do you need in place? And this, I'm not going to try to do the perfectly exhaustive list here, but here's some of the things that our clients are using and thinking about. So one of the key areas is really removing, separating the authentication step from authorization. Very often, if you log on to the network and you authenticate to the network, with a privileged account, you end up being default authorized to do all kinds of stuff. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that plays out. That specifically they're removing direct endpoint access. Just because you're authenticated, doesn't mean you actually get access to specific servers or services or network nodes, etc. At least with privileged rights. Strengthening user ID and password mechanism. Just by using strong passwords, that we've heard over and over, that can help a lot. There's a downside to that. You make the password requirements too onerous, and what do people do? They write them down, etc. So we'll talk about some ways to think about how you can have the best of both worlds: very strong passwords, but not have them in a list or written down and popped on a yellow sticky on the side of a laptop or a desktop or a monitor. And really, what a lot of organizations are trying to do is, or should be doing, this is on the recommendation column, is least everything. We call that zero trust, which is taking the least privilege concept and really putting that on steroids. But it's only allowing people to have access to the devices that they should have access to, only allowing them to do the access the console or the tools that they're supposed to access. only being able to execute, for example, certain commands and not execute other commands. Being able to alert if a violation happens. There's a lot that's been written, said, and talked about in terms of trying to figure out what went on with a breach using SIM tools and things like that. And certainly not against that, but the way we look at it is you really want to be able to, if somebody's doing something with a privileged account and trying to violate a policy, you don't want to wait and look in your log files later. You want to let somebody know. That's probably something that you're going to want to know right away and want to alert the SOC team to, or your security team to, etc. And then being able to respond upon thresholds, and the last piece there ends up being very important and something that we're seeing a lot of folks talking about. We mentioned that we were at the Identity and Access Management conference that Gartner put on in Las Vegas in early December, and they spent a fair amount of time on this whole privilege, identity, and access management. They had one presentation specifically on that topic, and a second presentation that brought that topic, up in the context of virtualization and cloud, why that's much more important these days. And one of the key things that they were focusing on is being able to put all of these controls together and use the appropriate controls based on the risk level, or what asset are you trying to protect, what kind of controls. But bringing, a lot of these were in the past, point tools and things like that. There wasn't any way to comprehensively put all these controls together in a single product. So we'll show you a little bit about that. But this gets you an idea of a starting point for zero trust. Now, one thing that, having been a security practitioner myself in the past, that that you really have to keep in mind is this idea of security versus complexity. Now, we gave you one example there with the password. You make it the password rules so onerous, or don't figure out a different way to do that, you end up with passwords written down and saved or distributed insecurely. So your security's always been a scenario which you're trading off high security versus complexity. We think will provide some ideas about how to have your cake and eat it too, especially with some password stuff. But this is always a trade-off. And to that end, if you take a look at how people have, this is a question we get all the time for people that are just maybe had an auditor talk with them, or trying to meet some compliance requirements, or just trying to address this idea that say, hey, we've got, there are too many chief information security officers that woke up one morning and said, what I need is some more technology. I mean, everybody would like to be able to use what they have in place, and they certainly have a lot in place. And so this is, the things that we've circled here are very often the kinds of things that people have tried to string together to address this issue. So VPNs and directories and jump boxes, firewalls, and access control lists therein, using your routers and switches. And so we've had more than one customer come to us and said, we tried all this stuff, it was an absolute headache and didn't get us where we needed, or they took, they were investigating the technology, said, hey, we're going to try it this way. They always come back, and here's why. It's it's only partial protection, and we'll talk about what comprehensive protection here looks like. We've started to roll some of that out. But the big, so that's obviously a big issue. It doesn't protect against all the risks. It doesn't protect the credentials that you're using necessarily. It doesn't provide any kind of ongoing monitoring or alerting, for example, or you'd have to use some very circuitous things that are full of holes, if log files and things like that rolling into a SIM. I'm not saying not do that, but in terms of trying to identify a privileged user actively doing something wrong, that's a really, really tough road to hoe. Very often people can't get there at all. But a bigger issue, or as big of issue, is it's very complex and disjointed policies. And whenever you have that, you always, that means it's brittle. You have people that, or some subset of people that can slip through the cracks. It's the corollary to having complex disjointed policies across all these different platforms is it's really difficult to prove compliance. It's really hard when the auditor walks in and says, I want you to prove that you've locked these privileged accounts down, that you're locking the credentials, that you're only providing the right access. It's really, really hard to show them in any kind of meaningful way that you're actually accomplishing that. Another one that actually comes up fairly often was that by trying to get some of these tools to do the things that they weren't designed for, it actually weakens the primary security function. And probably the most notable one there is firewalls. A lot of our clients have tried to do some sort of, between firewalls and ACL, router kind of network segmentation stuff. It ended up, having a convoluted set of rules in the firewall that made it, easier to accidentally punch holes through that you didn't want to punch holes through. So, and then the bottom line there is that's all very expensive to manage on an operational sense. You add a new employee or a new set of third-party outsourcers to this, and trying to get them, ginned up in this environment and get them the credentials that they need and the access that they need, you end up having to touch all kinds of stuff, and again, potentially breaking some things. So I'm going to give you a quick use case, what our solution looks like kind of in a simple scenario, and then Sean will jump in and take you through some of this. But so in this case, we've got a systems or network admin, systems admin trying to get to a finance server to do some work. This server could be living in a traditional, it could be a bare metal install of a Unix environment. It could be sitting up on the VMware infrastructure. It may be running up on EC2 in the cloud. So it could be any of those places. And so the first step that we take with our X Suite platform is to make sure that you're vaulting and managing the credentials. So vaulting the credentials, puts them in a place that is, highly encrypted, and so beyond attacker. It also can enforce, strong password rules. It can enforce all of the rules for how often you have to recycle passwords, et cetera. In fact, you could recycle it every time somebody accesses a device, for example. So trying, to use brute force attacks on really long passwords that change all the time ends up being a fruitful exercise. So that's the first step, is vaulting and managing those credentials. And I keep saying passwords, but they're not always passwords. They can be, credentials, which we'll talk about. So that's the first thing. Put those in the vault, and more importantly, never let the end user see them. So, and we'll show you how that works, or talk to you about how that works. When you put those in the vault, now when you authenticate to our device, to X Suite, you have to positively identify yourself. That can be, using all kinds of different, strong authentication methods. We did a partnership recently with SafeNet, supporting their smart cards. We integrate with lots of other multi-factor authentication environments as well. So you can strongly authenticate that user, make sure you know exactly who it is up front. And then we control access to what they have. You'll see an access page that Sean will show you that provides that individual with a custom page that only allows them to get to the things that they're specifically entitled to get to. So that is separating off from access control. We monitor and fully record those sessions. All these controls you can turn on or off, at a group level, at an individual level. But so these are the full set of controls that you can have integrated. But we'll monitor and record those sessions. We can filter commands, so that we can let an individual only do certain commands. Maybe they can, maybe they can't reboot a server. They can go on and do some administrative functions, but they don't have the privileges to run the reboot command, for example. We can prevent leapfrogging. One of the, whether you're an insider or an outsider trying to attack a system, the modus operandi in that scenario is typically to gain a foothold on one server and then try to use that as a platform to move laterally throughout the network and get on to other servers. So we can prevent having access from one server giving you access to the other server. That's different ways of doing that. SSH telnet over to a device, or RDP hopping, are some examples of that. And then we can attribute the identity of this person even when they're using a shared account. So that finance server can still be set up using root, and so this person might be logging onto the root account. That certainly makes it a whole lot easier to set up your servers. When you're talking about a cloud environment, when you're setting up, tens or hundreds or, thousands of servers potentially, you can have the ease of setup of the server and root, but still be able to tell the auditor or tell yourselves, who is root at 11 o'clock on Thursday. That's, so attributing that identity to the session that got, was going on with that server at that particular time. And the last piece is really logging everything. So when we take a look at this, this is what we present as zero trust. This is least privilege on steroids, and providing a higher degree of control under a single unified policy management system. So that's also important. When we talked about the complexity versus security factor, it's not only the complexity for the end user, and this is super simple for the end user, but this is a complexity for the security team, the team that's administrating, overseeing who has access to what. If it's not easy for them, to do this and set this up, and it doesn't integrate with, key technologies that they've got in place, then a solution like this would fall down. So let me give you a couple of quick scenarios in which we can play. So this is, privilege, identity, and access management in a kind of a traditional legacy environment. So this it would be using our hard appliance, which is an appliance form factor. You've got a privileged user on the left side. They authenticate to our device, as we're showing in this scenario. They can use a multi-factor scenario like a smart card, authenticate through the client. We can check and make, we can actually pull that authentication from Active Directory or an LDAP server. If that's a scenario, we can do things like check a revocation list, to make sure that smart card, is still hasn't been revoked, or other credentials haven't been revoked, etc. And then from there, they get access to application network and servers, and we're able to overlay all the controls that we talked about on the last slide, so that we can do all the things we talked about from the zero trust scenario. Let me give you another. Let me get past this one. Well, actually, let me introduce this, and I was gonna run past this, but one of the scenarios when you talk about cloud computing, a lot of vendors, there's really vendors at different levels of maturity in their security program, and the AWS guys have a very high level of maturity with the security program that they've got in place. But a key thing to take away is that the way they approach it is it's a shared security model. AWS is responsible, if you will, taking care of security from the cement through the hypervisor, protecting their physical data centers, all the way up, to logical protection through the hypervisor. You, as the customer, are responsible for protecting everything above that. So protecting the nodes and servers and devices and applications that run above that. So they've also implemented a really set of interesting APIs and tools that make this easier and helpful for you to do. So that's why they're really on the front end of that maturity curve, well past anybody. But it's the takeaway here is you still have responsibility. You're and anybody who's been in security for a long time knows that you can't outsource the responsibility for doing security. You might be able to outsource some roles and tasks and things, and that's very true in the hybrid cloud environment. So you got to protect your instances. You have to protect the credentials that your systems network database administrators, whether they're your employees or third parties, are using, etc. And you have to authorize, vet, and manage the privileged users for those environments. The folks that are doing the work on your infrastructure that happens to be running in the cloud. So with that, let me give you a scenario here. This is a little bit more complicated. We've got a customer data center on-premise scenario on the left. In this scenario, it's a hybrid scenario where they're running servers, application, and network nodes in their own four walls of their data center, and they're also running some of that some capability up in one of the availability zones at AWS on EC2, for example. So the same scenario works here. You can still authenticate using a smart card to our device and get access to the on-premise, control access and vault the credentials for the on-premise devices. And we can bridge over to, with that hardware appliance running on your premise, we can make the bridge over to the AWS environment. So whether you're a super user having to go into the AWS console and do some commands and set up some infrastructure, or whether you're maybe a database administrator who has to manage a database on one of those many servers there on the right side, we can pass those credentials and then provide all of the same set of controls that we talked about to limit what they can do on that side. So that's and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Sean is going to show a little bit of this. And there's another scenario here where we showed, this scenario was the device running on your premise. We also have an AMI version of the device that X Suite will run as a virtualized appliance up on the EC2 infrastructure, and that's bi-directional, so you can manage all the access to all the devices and network nodes running up in EC2. You can also manage the access to the devices back into your data center. A lot of enterprise customers aren't doing this, but if you're predominantly, moving some or part of your, environment over to AWS, for example, this is a legitimate scenario for some users. I think a lot of our enterprise customers are starting here using the appliance to bridge the gap over. So with that, let me turn it over to Sean, and I'll have him take us through.
Can you hear me, Pat?
Some of the scenarios that we wanted to show.
And I'm hoping everyone can see my screen as well.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so Pat kind of talked with you a lot about what the X Suite capabilities are as it's relative to maybe not just an on-premise or enterprise solution, as well as maybe a totally cloud-based public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud kind of an environment. The core of what X Suite does, management of privileged access and privileged credentials, passwords, keys, etc., is going to be the same regardless of where the resource resides. Whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on your premise, it's all going to operate the same. So to that end, what I've done is I've created a little diagram here, and I'm just going to maximize this thing on the screen so you can see it. And again, I apologize for the resolution. It's not the greatest rendering that comes out of Visio sometimes, so again, I do apologize for that. But what you're looking at here is a group of remote users coming through an X Suite appliance. In this case, we're showing it as a physical appliance, but this could easily be a virtual appliance that's sitting up in EC2. We are getting ready to release support for OpenStack, so other virtual platforms will be supported as well, as you can see from this list that's right here. Authentication can happen, as Patrick showed in sort of what I call the fishbone slide, a number of different ways. Authentication via locally on the box, via Radius, with smart cards, with RSA tokens, or third-party solutions that involve multi-factor authentication via either smart tokens or physical tokens. Again, accessing a number of different resources. What I'm going to walk you through is showing you exactly this, what a remote user, what I'll call a standard user in the Exedium vernacular or X Suite vernacular, what a standard user goes through in order to access a resource and perform some activities on the back end. Notice that there's only one appliance here, and from this one appliance that I've got over here as being on-premise, we will have the ability to connect out to the cloud-based resources. In my instance right now for my demo, it's all going to be with AWS, and we're going to jump into that and show you that right now. So let me close that out and just log in. So I'm not very good when it comes to coming up with cute little names. So the diagram said remote users, and so I'm just going to kind of go with the remote user theme here. I'm going to log in with a password that I have. I do have this particular appliance loaded up to support RSA two-factor tokens, do what we call composite auth, where we can take Active Directory username, Active Directory password on top of the soft token PIN and token code. We can do Radius as well as Active Directory LDAP capabilities. In my case, if I do that, you'll see here I've got a couple different domains that I've got configured, but I'm just going to log in with local credentials here. Once I log in, I'm greeted with an access page. I also happen to have multiple different roles applied to the same user account. So there are 17 different roles, all the way from super global administrator, which means I can perform any and all activity on the appliance, going all the way through to having read-only access to just look at settings of the box without any ability to change them, as you can see here. Also have the ability to go in here and look at the logs of the appliance, as well as look at some session recording files, and we'll jump back here to that in a little bit. So this is it. User logs in. Once they're logged in, every single aspect of what that user is doing is being recorded. And so what that means to you is that if I were to come in here and do this, and I just go right here and look at the logs, what you'll see is it just shows that remote user has just logged into the session. Okay. Here it is, log in, log out, log in, and here I am performing an administrative activity to look at the logs, just to kind of generate some log data here. But it's all tracked based upon the unique username of the person that logged into the appliance. So in this case, if I wanted to jump out and see the domain controller, I can come right over here and click on the RDP option. We do have additional features such as RDP mapping and such that allow you to do some additional kind of things, but the point of this is to really show you that we do have some capability on the appliance itself to be able to support the ability to transfer files to target servers and such. While I'm on this box, I'm just going to see if this is going to work for us today. I had a little bit of an issue with this yesterday, but I believe that everything's been ironed out. So if I wanted to, let's say, for example, run a telnet command to a resource that I have on my network. Let's see if that's going to connect. Yeah, you can see here that the connection has failed. The reason that the connection fails is because there isn't an ability for that particular resource to be made available based upon policies that we define in the product. Similarly, you can see here that as I tried to just access an RDP session, that also failed due to a policy violation that we've built. So in addition to providing the raw access to the resource, we have additional capability to provide the containment capability so that that resource can only be accessed by that user at that particular time without any ability to connect to any other resource in the environment. This is very, very useful if you have a particular vendor that has a very specific function or is contracted to do a very specific job. Giving them the ability to not be able to connect to any other resource in the environment is something that is going to be highly sought after and valued. And you can do this in a way, as Pat mentioned before, that doesn't require you to create lots of segmentation in your network or down to 4-node subnets and those types of things. You can see here that if violations are exceeded after a certain number that you define in the policy, the user session will in fact be terminated. Okay, so that's an example of what a standard user would do if they wanted access to a particular resource. It just so happens that we capture all of these logs. So everything that you see here is actually being logged. All of the violations, here you'll see where they are. Here's a violation showing that we blocked the RDP access the first time. You can see that it happened 2 more times after that. And then, of course, we exceeded the maximum number of violations, so the session was terminated. While we were in that session, it was also being recorded. So we have the ability inside of X Suite is from the logs here to jump right to view a session recording file and have that come right up on the screen for you. This is about a 1:43 long video that we're playing back in real time. You can see on the screen how everything's happening. I'm just going to go all the way back here so you can see a little bit more of it. But you'll notice I've got tick marks on the bottom of the timeline. The timeline is actually the day of time that the X Suite appliance is configured for. So I'm on the East Coast, so it's set to Eastern Time, GMT -5. As this plays through, you get the indicators in the timeline to let you know right where the violations took place. So even though we are recording the video, we also enhance it with metadata that allows you to not have to watch hours and hours of video to determine where the violations were in a user session, right? We also have the ability to, use some navigation here and, fast forward, rewind from the events in the list that are shown here on the left and provide that playback for you. Last little comment that I'll make here is that even though this is the 2-minute recording, the resolution of this display is 1920 by 1280, I believe. We are still only eating up about 122 kilobytes of hard drive space for this 2-minute recording. If anybody has ever downloaded a 2-minute high-quality video on YouTube, you know that sometimes those videos can be 10, 12, 15, 50 megabytes in size. And so one of the benefits of the X Suite solution is that we can provide these high-quality full screen capture session recordings back without the traditional storage tax that most other solutions have to pay. And we can do it in a way that doesn't require any kind of an agent on the desktop whatsoever. If I go back here, go back to the Access tab on this particular session, I'm going to go ahead and connect to an Oracle server with a root permission. Now, interestingly enough, what I'm going to have you pay attention to here, and what we kind of skimmed over with the domain controller, in fact, why don't I just go back and launch it again? What you'll notice is that I don't actually enter a credential to get to this desktop, nor do I enter a credential inside of this SSH session. The really fun thing about X Suite, when we combine the access control capabilities that we have to do things like record the session, capture the logs, create whitelist policies on what users can access what resource in your environment, you also have the ability to hide the password in such a way that the end user can get access to the resource without ever needing to know or see the actual credential used. So many times what happens is organizations end up having to manage a separate set of accounts inside of their Active Directory infrastructure, or they create local accounts on the Radius server, such that they can throw those away when the user's done with the job. What we're actually saying here is that you can actually map credentials to a particular account inside of your infrastructure, and then map that to an Exedium user so that the user never needs to know what the credential is and they can still do their job. If I jump back here, you can see again all of the actions are being monitored on this system. If I do a who am I here, it says that I'm logged in with the X Suite SSH credential. Notice that it's a non-privileged credential. The prompt here near the host name gives us a $sign that let us know we're not a privileged user. If I were to try to escalate and go to, let's say, sudo su, you'll notice that as soon as I try to escalate privilege, that there's been a violation inside of the command line session. Neat thing about our product, again, without needing any kind of an agent on this particular Oracle Linux server, is that we can go ahead in line and while the commands are being entered, prevent the unauthorized execution of commands that you define via blacklist. Similarly, if you have a whitelist of commands that are expressly authorized, anything that's not on that whitelist will be expressly denied. And you can customize the message, as you can see here. If I wanted to maybe try to reboot this server, I have non-privileged access. Even if I had privileged access, I still wouldn't be able to do it. So you can see there that I don't have an ability to reboot. If I wanted to try to do a service network restart and restart the networking services, you can see that again I was kicked out of the session after the third violation. Again, jumping back to the logs just to kind of give you a quick overview here. Again, everything's tracked back to this remote user that you can see right here. Okay, the Oracle server session was closed, and all of those logs are actually being captured. It actually looks like, as I look at this, that the policy for this particular user is set up such that the sessions are not being recorded. How do you like that? At least I believe so. Let's go here and look at the session logs. Yeah. So it looks like that's happened. So it's a great opportunity for me to log off from that standard user account and log in with a global administrative account and show you how we define policy. So in this instance, that was an Oracle server that I was connected to. So it's just simply a matter of going up here into the gray navigation bar, going to policy, manage policy. I'm just going to type in here Oracle. I have a lot of policies here, but I want to really make this easy to find what I'm looking for. Here is the policy. So the session is being recorded here. If I go to the back end and just verify that all of the logs are being recorded, you can see here also that we've defined that the text-based sessions are going to be recorded and that the graphical sessions are also going to be recorded. Okay, so that's a way for us to be able to go in here and just validate that the policies are up and running and everything's just fine.
I think it's important to note, Sean, as you go, as we talked about, I mean, not all the policies, there's lots of things you can do with a lot of controls you can put in place with X Suite, but that's all policy-based configurable, so you can implement the policies for the set of assets that you're trying to protect and the user group that you're trying to protect that makes sense for that user group and for those assets. You can turn certain things on, certain things off.
Yeah, absolutely. The term privileged user gets around quite a bit, especially in our space. But one of the things that I find is that everyone defines privileged user differently. If I'm in a healthcare organization, my privileged users could be doctors, they could be nurses. If I'm in pharmaceuticals, it could be that the scientists that have all of this intellectual property that are recording all of their data from their studies on computers, they could be privileged users. If I'm a outsourced contractor working on a particular project, I could be a privileged user. So there's all these different definitions, and you can create these various categories of these users inside of X Suite just through point and click configuration via the GUI here, and it's very, very simple to do. So great point. All right, so in my diagram, I'm going to go back to that. Just let me pull this back up here so that way we can kind of have a gauge of where we're at, because I'm conscious of the time that we're spending with you guys. So essentially what I've done is I've logged in with the remote user access. I've gone down here through Exedium, through the access page that you can see on the backside, and you can see here it says on-premise down here in the little gray box. These are all the resources that we've got. And we've got on-premise. Now, if I want to get access to the cloud-based resources, well, it's really easy to do. This particular user account that I logged in with, the remote user account, actually has an ability to look at cloud-based resources too. So similar to how we can define and create different types of users and user groups. Users have the ability to manage their own views and can create customized views themselves. If you want to see all the devices on the list, it's really just a matter of using a larger drop-down list and saying unfilter the view, and then you can go ahead and give access to the entire list of resources. Again, this particular user has access to both enterprise on-premise devices as well as cloud-based resources, but it could just as easily be that this user only has policies to access just on-premise or the cloud. Similarly to how we've done everything inside of the on-premise based resources, it's the same process. There's no difference from the end user perspective. They don't know where the device resides necessarily, but all they have to do is point and click and they're going to get access to the resources. Okay, so again, sessions are going to be recorded, everything's going to be logged, audited, and monitored. Everything's going to be tracked back to this user named remote user that's on this particular system. If it was an Active Directory user, it would be, swhank@domain.com that would actually show up as the person that performed the activities in this session. Okay. If I wanted to go back here and just jump around, I'm going to see if I can connect to the AWS Management Console here. And while that happens, I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can do this as well.
Hey, Sean, Hey, Sean, I'm just going to point out, you answered the first question that came in is, can you do all the same, implement all the same controls that you do for your on-premise stuff for the cloud stuff? And I didn't want to go whistling by that without, the answer is yes. We can implement all those same controls. It doesn't matter where the device lives. So if you've got a hybrid environment that has parts of your infrastructure in different places, it doesn't matter to us where those things live.
No, exactly. Very, very good point, Pat. And again, this is, you'll notice here it's going to look a little bit different. The user interface actually doesn't look a whole lot different. I know that this is different only because I'm looking at the user or the host, the prompt here, right? So if I do a who am I in this session, it's going to say that I've got a user account here, test user, as it shows in the prompt. In the background, I've also opened up another RDP session to show how we can, beyond just limiting access to a specific resource, how we can actually limit access to a specific application on a specific server. Doing this also, you can still enforce all of the other controls that we have in place. What you're noticing here is I don't have an ability, even though I'm trying to right-click on the desktop, nothing's actually happening. If I actually have the appropriate access to get into this database, I can perform the activities on this server with this database resource without any problem. If I try to close this session and try to get to the desktop, I'm automatically logged out of my session. So again, being able to do things like hide the start menu, hide the desktop icons, remove the right-click context so that they can only work inside of the given application that they're authorized to have based upon policy is another feature that we have with the Next Suite. Again, regardless of where the resource resides, if I wanted to try to reboot this AWS server, you can see here it's the same message, right? If I wanted to try to restart the service, again, same kind of a message. If I wanted to try to SSH to another resource, right? Again, I get kicked out of the session, no problem. I have here a web-based service. I have my Splunk server, syslog server that I use. It's in the cloud. As it turns out, I'm running this inside of AWS environment. If I wanted to go ahead in here and look at all the logs that are relative to this particular, that are being sent to this particular syslog server, it's going to go ahead and load that information up here. So whether I'm accessing desktops, whether I'm accessing Windows desktops, whether I'm accessing Linux servers, Unix servers, whether I'm accessing mainframes, whether I'm accessing web portals, having the ability to provide all of this centralized access so that you can track all the user activity back is something that we feel is a very, very strong competitive advantage that X Suite provides. So again, you can see all these logs being generated here. These are all being forwarded to a log server. And then, of course, I have the session recordings as well. Anything that does show up in red, if I come back here, you'll see that I've got some other resources here that show up in red, going all the way into what I can say is already last year in 2012. I have a number of devices that show up in red. Anytime there's something that shows up in red, that's an indication that there has been some type of policy violation. So if I want to go ahead and view this recording for this Oracle server as an example, simply clicking on that view recording button will allow that to launch and play back. So again, just a kind of a summary and closeout, because I see we're right at the top of the hour as the playback happens here. You have the ability with X Suite to provide privileged access to resources that exist on your local premise, as well as in the cloud virtual. It doesn't matter if your resource is a physical appliance. It doesn't matter if your resource is a virtual appliance. It could be a virtual appliance that's sitting inside of an ES6 server inside of your data center that's local to you. It could be on an EC2 instance. It could be outsourced to a rack space or some other resource. It really makes no difference. If it has a publicly accessible IP address and you can provide the appropriate configuration inside of X Suite to allow access to those resources, X Suite will have no problem being able to manage them. In fact, as we close this out, just to give you a view, a little bit of a preview of what's going on here, let me go ahead and bring up to show you how I'm actually running this environment. So here you'll see I've got, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. I'm running an ESX server on my Mac inside of Fusion. Here you'll see that I'm actually running the X Suite instance local to my premise. So in that diagram, if I go back here, pull this back to show this to you. This device that you see right here is actually this virtual instance of this resource. All of my target resources that are on premise are actually here running inside of this ESXi instance. Okay, if you want to see just the resources that I have out in AWS, just to let you know that all of this stuff is real, I can show you that as well. Just go ahead and log into my console. Go here to EC2. And you can see that all of the instances that are running, I've got 10 of them running. And I'm just going to show the running instances, and here they are. Right, so here's my syslog server that we connected to. Here's the EC2 data domain controller, some of the Red Hat servers that I connected to. A lot of really, really cool things.
Hey, Sean,
one of the things or features, yeah.
You got a quick question here on, I guess it's, make sure I parse it right. It's a question about auto discovery of devices they've got, and specifically in the cloud, they've got lots of devices. And so they're wondering how they would do that, in the cloud, especially where things come and now I'm editorializing, but a lot of things that people they want to know how to do auto discovery, especially for all devices, but especially for the cloud, and that's a question that comes up a lot with clients. One of the big selling propositions of the cloud is that it can be highly dynamic. You can spin stuff up, spin stuff down, without having to go procure a hardware to do it. So. How do we work in that kind of environment?
It's a really good question. And there's a number of ways that we can do auto discovery. X Suite has a built-in, a very light Nmap discovery tool to allow you to automatically import devices over appropriate protocols. So we'll know if it's a Windows box over RDP. We'll know if it's a Linux box with SSH or Telnet or something like that. So we have a mechanism to do that. One of the neat things about X Suite is the fact that we've done some pretty deep integration with AWS, to the fact that if I come over here to the Manage Devices screen and I look here, you can see that I've got a ton of these devices that have these very long addresses. Distinct from any other devices that have, the standard 4-octet IP address. These addresses here are synonymous with AWS resources. Okay. In fact, if I look at this particular device right here, this is IP address 23.23.164.216. That is actually, where'd it go? Where did it go? Oh, I'm not showing all of my devices here. Give me just a second. Let me show them all. It's this guy right here. Okay. So if I actually go back over here to the console and I look at this X Suite 2.1 instance, you can see here's the IP address that I've assigned from the Elastic IP from the Elastic IP pool that AWS offers. So I'm actually connected to an AWS instance right now. Okay. If I want to add resources, it's really not that difficult. I have a couple different ways that I can do that. If I want to launch from X Suite, I want to launch the AWS Management Console. So let me just go ahead and close this guy out here. So now I'm just looking at X Suite. I have no access to my console in the traditional way, but I do have it through X Suite. And so this is where Pat was describing our ability to provide, again, protected access to the Management Console. In this case for AWS, but it could also be for your vCenter or ESXi instance as well. In this particular case, if I go to EC2 here, and that's going to just take a second, actually looping back, what you'll notice is that protection of specific activities inside of the EC2 instance, I'm not allowed, or I've logged in with a credential that's not authorized to perform certain activity. Okay, so here you'll see I'm not authorized to access any of the running instances. If I try to click on the running instances here, basically nothing happens, right? I may be able to get to that page that shows them to me, but when I get there, all I end up seeing is that I'm not authorized to perform this action. So digging a little bit deeper here, I'm going to show you the policy, how this works, because another one of the integration points that we've got with AWS is this ability to create policies. So the current policy that I've defined, let me just go ahead and bring up that account right here, is that the user only has the ability to look at the S3 bucket that's available underneath the account that he logs in with. I'm going to change this so that this particular user has administrator access. That simple change right there will allow me the ability to come back in here on this same account. Again, I'm doing this because I have administrative privilege inside of X Suite as well as inside of the AWS console. So I'm giving myself administrative permissions to come in here and make changes. So now when I go to EC2, what you're going to see is that I'm actually going to have the ability to make any kind of changes that I want. I can start systems, I can stop systems. All those unauthorized components kind of went away. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to launch a few instances to show you just a couple ways that we can get this auto discovery to work. Now, I can do this from a command line as well, but I like to go through the graphical GUI just so that people get an understanding of how we're setting this thing up. So I'm just going to launch a few instances inside of EC2. I'll launch 4. They're all going to be micro instances here. I'm going to go ahead and just leave all the instance details just the same, no problem there. Just go ahead with a standard root type of device. I'm going to go ahead and call these web demo, okay? And then I'm going to add a feature in here. It's called X Suite groups, okay? And I think I call this web demo as well, and I'm just going to say continue. I've got to pick a key pair that I want to use to be able to log in with those resources. And I'm going to just put them in the default security group and then launch. So again, I was able to log in with my administrative credential and launch those instances. If I jump to the instance page, what you'll see, I have like 30 some odd instances that are in here and running, but I'm just going to limit this back down to the running instances. Well, let's go ahead and maybe show them all. And let's just do a quick search here. Here you'll see I've got 4 pending web demo instances. If I jump back to the Devices tab here, go to Manage Devices, and I do a refresh of the AWS devices, you'll see I had 24 earlier, now I have 28. If I show all 28, here are the other 4 web demo devices. So whatever you add inside of AWS will automatically be picked up by Exedium, so you won't have to worry about manually importing these devices. If I go to look at the policies, so if I say here, you can double check something here. Yeah, let's go here to the policy, and I'll look at the web demo policy. Okay, for the super account. Right. So here's the policy that I have. Actually, I don't have a policy for this particular user account. Maybe it's for this other account that I've got here. No. So if I had a policy configured, I would be able to go ahead and just have all those devices automatically import. It looks like for some reason I don't have an existing policy, but it would be simply just a matter of coming in here, picking the credentials that I wanted to be able to use, set up the fact that I want these to be recorded, go ahead and apply any of the command filters that I'd like. And as simple
So those
as that,
policies are all,
I would be able to define policy.
Sean, in that case, if those
Go ahead,
policies
Pat.
were already predefined, you'd end up discovering those instances as soon as they were launched and just attaching, because of that tag that you gave web demo, it would apply those policies automatically.
Correct. So here you can see inside of this policy interface, I can actually define the type of group that I'm going to set up. So one of the features is we can define between local groups on your premise as well as cloud-based or AWS-based groups. The reason that AWS comes up is because this particular X Suite instance is licensed for the AWS capability. And then from there, all I really need to do is select the devices. So let me save this. Okay. So there, now that web demo group is created, if I go back here to the devices, and manage the devices. I can go to each one of these, show all 28. I can now go to each one of these and add them to that web demo group, right? And I'll just do it with that one. And then I will go ahead and do that with the, where's the web demo one? Yeah. So if I was smart, I would have had this done ahead of time, Pat. Looks like I didn't. I wasn't as smart as I would have liked to have been. And prepared for that. So long story short is that yes, you would have the ability to do just that. So in this case, if I, again, now you can see I've got the web demo group in there. If I select the super account, I can go ahead and create this policy. Any device that's part of that group will go ahead and log in with the appropriate permissions for that group. Again, the rest of the process is still the same.
All right. So auto discover, auto provision if you've done the setup work. That's keyed off of just the tag that you gave it.
Yeah, so good question. So if I jump back over here, so I created the group called Web Demo, and then as we created these, there are tags inside of AWS that we used. The tag that we created for AWS was called X Suite Groups, and so long as that X Suite Groups tag matches with whatever the device group that you've defined in here as being AWS, in this case Web Demo, then it'll absolutely work without a problem.
Cool. Well, I think that hits the, let's walk through the questions. I think throughout the presentation, I think you've hit most of, you've cleared the decks, I think, on all the questions. So I think we're a little bit over, which is good, and we've still got some folks hanging out. So if there's any final questions, let me ask you to go ahead and type the question into the question box, and we'll deal with those. And if not, if we don't have any in the next minute or so, then we'll just bid adieu.
One more thing I'll add, Patrick. I'm logging back into my local VM X Suite instance because wanted to just ensure that everyone understands that whether we're accessing resources from a virtualized X Suite platform to local resources like this one is, or whether we're accessing resources across the board. Again, I'm just going to jump to the cloud view here. Having the ability, again, I've got this AWS Management Console link right here. I can connect to those resources regardless. So I can go from my local on-premise X Suite and from there launch the session as you're seeing here. Again, depending upon the policies and how they're defined. So again, I can get the fact that in this case, the super user has access to log into the console, perform any activity inside of that environment, and then have that session be recorded. Right? We know that it was, again, the super account that gained access to that system, and then if I wanted to look at the session recordings, well, there it is. I can view it right here, and lo and behold, now we've got auditability of a web-based session for AWS resources. Who performed what action, who launched what resource, who deleted what resource, those types of things can all now be tracked.
Excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with this. We'd certainly entertain this usually drives a lot of additional questions in people's minds and how it might fit into their environment and with their specific use cases. We'd be delighted to take you up on that. Hit us up on the website, hit the contact us form, and we'd be happy to set that up. One of the things that we didn't spend a lot of time on here talking, but I'll leave you with a little bit of an advertisement. Our client base is decidedly enterprise. So, we showed you a lot of the core features, but one of the things that I would add to what Sean and I have said previously is that we do a lot of things to make reliability, availability, scalability, and high security real. We very much encourage you to ask us about that as we go down the path. So we have clustering capability, for example. We've got a lot of large telco clients, for example, and downtime just isn't something that they'll deal with. We've got for high availability, kinds of things. It runs. We've got clients that have hundreds of thousands of nodes that they're managing and securing through X Suite, through cluster of devices, for example. So we didn't, again, so since many of our clients are decidedly enterprise in scale, we'd be happy to talk to you about that. That's a place that not only the feature set we provide, but the capabilities that we provide to make that feature set work in a real enterprise environment is something we'd love to follow up with you on. So with that, I will thank everybody for joining us. Very happy to have you here. Enjoy the rest of your day. I know we will. It's still sunny and warm in January, so we're going to go take a little walk here and get some fresh air. Have a great evening, afternoon, or rest of the morning, depending on where you are, and we look forward to following up with you. Take care.